Hello, friends. Happy Easter Monday. I'm at home today, obviously. I've got a tiny bit of a grumpy baby in my arms, and the church office is closed. And later today, actually, I'm heading out to a conference with Mary Jane Cole and some other great clergy through Hendricks. And to that end, we are not going to have our gathering tonight. Our Monday night class will not be meeting tonight. The group thought they could use a week off, and so we are going to gather next week. We will just kind of do a quick catch up on the New Testament at that point and move forward then. I am not going to do much of a recap over our reading from the last week, mainly because we have read a whole lot of prophets, and to be honest, you all know about them. They're talking to either pre-exilic, exilic, or post-exilic Israel, and God is mad and they need to fix their lives. Okay, so that's pretty much it in a lot of different forms through a lot of different voices. I hope that y'all did experience some of the tonal shifts just between the prophets, the way they talked, the way they communicated, the way they wrote. You get a little bit of an individual and unique look at each prophet, and maybe the different ways that people experienced this time in history as well. Looking forward now, we are officially in the New Testament, and what I wanted to do today in our video is just spend a couple of minutes recapping what you should expect from each of these first 5 books of the Bible. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. The first 4 are called our Gospels. These are the ones that tell us about the story of Jesus. Now, while Matthew is first, Mark was the one that was most likely written first. They believe Mark was written around 30 years after Jesus' death, so probably around 60, 70. And Mark is kind of a simple history. So Mark is just trying to get some stories down on paper so that people who maybe have never met Jesus or places where Jesus never went would have some of the stories of Jesus. Now, Matthew and Luke, they took the Mark text and they improved upon it for their individual audiences. And what I mean by that is Matthew took a lot of what Mark wrote, and we know that because some of the things are written almost verbatim. Matthew took those, and then what he did is he wrote it into a Jewish context. And so when you read Matthew, or as you continue reading it today, you're going to see a lot of moments where he is hearkening back to prophecy. And that's because prophecy matters to the Jewish people, right? Because he's hearkening it back to the texts that they know and love. And so Matthew is writing to convince people from the Jewish faith that Jesus is that Messiah, that one that they have been waiting for. And so Matthew takes Mark and kind of improves upon it, enhances it with more Jewish contexts. Luke is the exact opposite. So Luke is not writing to the Jewish people, but instead to the Gentiles. So he takes Mark in the same way Matthew does. Again, some of it is almost verbatim, and he takes it and he makes it more towards a Gentile audience, and they don't care about prophecy. What they care about is proof. They want healings and they want teachings. And so Luke dives in hard into the miracles, especially healing miracles. He also talks a lot about the parables that Jesus taught through. And so you can hear George is super excited about the Gospels as well. So Matthew and Luke both take Mark, and then they kind of mold it into the audiences that they're addressing. Then we have John. Now, Matthew and Luke are both written about 30 years after Mark. They think probably around 80-ish, maybe even 90. And then we get to John, and John is written later. So we know that John was most likely written not until about 100 or 110 in its final form. It was probably being trickled around before then. And John is writing in a way that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are not. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are really trying to tell a historical vision of who Jesus is, to try to give people a really good sense of who Jesus is in a historical sense. Who was the person Jesus? John is trying to tell you theologically who Jesus is. John is a theological text. And you will notice from the very beginning the way that looks, right? When Luke begins, we get the story of Jesus being born. Matthew tells a genealogy because the Jews care about the genealogy. Mark kind of skips birth narrative and gets straight into the ministry of Jesus. John, however, gives us a huge theological spectrum of who Jesus is, right? In the beginning. So let's start before ministry, before birth. before genealogy, let's go all the way to the beginning. In the beginning was the light, was the Word. And so that gives us a good sense of what to expect in John. John is a beautiful literary text. It's written really beautifully, but it also, I think, really informs the way we understand the rest of them. I look forward to hearing your reflections on the Gospel of John, because I just think it is just really a powerful book, and gives us some great insight into who we are and who Jesus is. Now, I'm going to wrap Acts into this as well, because Acts is written by the author of Luke. Now, when we talk about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, a lot of people, these are like kind of just like in the same way that we give Moses credit for Exodus. We know that most likely Moses didn't sit down and write Exodus. That's kind of a historical attribution. That's the same thing for Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are more historical attributions. Or we don't know exactly what it means that those books are titled Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But Acts is written by the same author as Luke. And Acts is the story of the beginning of the church. And it gives us the Pentecost story and this beautiful vision of how the word of Jesus spread throughout the region and throughout the world, really. And so you're going to notice a very similar tone from Luke into Acts. That same historicity, but without that really big leaning into prophecy or the Jewish context, that same reaching out to the Gentile idea, as we see in Luke. So that is Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. We have read almost all of Matthew at this point, and we will kind of plow through the rest of those in the week to come. But I am excited to hear your reflections. I'm kind of excited that we're going to get to talk about all the Gospels at once, because I think that's going to give us some really good some really good things to talk about, some really good conversation starters. Friends, my prayers are with you as we continue. I know some of our older friends have kind of come back into the fold for the New Testament, some people who maybe fell away during the Old Testament, and so welcome back. And let's continue forward, friends. Again, happy Easter to each of you. Christ is risen. Alleluia.